All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep on a potential future that feels straight out of a geopolitical thriller.
Oh, yeah, this one's a doozy.
We're diving into Navroop Singh's book, The Next Great War. And let me tell you, it lays out a scenario for World War III that's, well, chillingly plausible.
It really makes you think, like, what if this actually happened?
Right. It all starts with something that feels so current, so ripped from the headlines, a broken North Korean nuclear deal. But from there,
Things escalate quickly.
quickly is an understatement. Singh walks us through this cascade of events, these chain reactions that draw in all the big players, the US, China, Russia.
And some surprising alliances, too. You won't believe who ends up siding with who.
That's the thing about this book. It's not just dry geopolitical analysis. It's like a what-if scenario playing out in real time with real consequences. And get this, he doesn't stop at the war itself.
No, he goes even further.
Singh imagines a whole new world order emerging from the ashes of this conflict, a world reshaped by the war and its aftermath.
It's a pretty radical vision, but that's what makes it so thought-provoking. It forces us to consider not just the potential for conflict, but the kind of world we might be left with if it actually happens.
Okay, so let's get into it. The book starts with a familiar scene. Rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea is being provocative, pushing boundaries, trying to get what they want from the international community. Does this starting point, this portrayal of North Korea's motivations, does it ring true to you?
Oh, absolutely. North Korea's been playing this game for decades. It's classic brinkmanship. They know they're a small nation. They don't have the conventional military might of the bigger powers. So they use these other tactics, these provocations, to try and level a playing field.
So it's kind of a David versus Goliath situation, but with nukes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Their nuclear program, that's their ultimate bargaining chip. It's their way of saying, we're here, we matter, you have to listen to us.
And that brings us to the Tashkent Declaration, this big negotiated settlement that supposedly leads to the North Korean nuclear deal, the NKND. On the surface, it looks like a classic compromise. Denuclearization in exchange for security guarantees, lifting sanctions, giving North Korea a path to economic recovery.
Right.
But even as this deal's being signed, there's this sense of skepticism. Like, is this really going to work?
Right, from the get-go, Singh portrays this deal as incredibly fragile. Some see it as a necessary risk, the only way to prevent something even worse from happening.
Right, like what choice do we have?
But then there are others, especially in the U.S., who see it as a huge gamble, a naive mistake. They believe North Korea can't be trusted, that they'll never give up their nuclear ambitions.
It's fascinating how Singh weaves in those different perspectives, the internal struggles within governments as they try to grapple with this really high-stakes decision. It adds a layer of realism. It's not just black and white.
Yeah, it highlights the immense challenges of negotiating with, well, let's just say, actors who may not always play by the rules. Trust is crucial in any agreement, and there's not a whole lot of trust to go around in this situation.
So, okay, let's fast forward about 15 years to the late 2030s.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. intelligence community makes a shocking discovery. North Korea's been cheating. They've never stopped their nuclear program. They've been secretly violating the NKND all along. I mean, talk about a betrayal, right? It's like a stab in the back for those who actually believe this deal could work.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is going through the minds of the key players at this point?
Oh, I imagine there's a mix of shock, anger, maybe even a bit of I told you so from those who were skeptical all along. But for those who championed the deal, who really believed in it, it must feel like a devastating failure, a real blow to their credibility.
And it's not just that North Korea's been cheating. They've managed to create this whole network, this web of covert alliances to support their nuclear ambitions. Singh calls it an Islamic communism axis. It's got China, Pakistan, and even Turkey. I mean, that sounds like something straight out of a Cold War spy novel.
Yeah, it's an unlikely bunch, Ray. But it shows how much the world has changed, how the old alliances are shifting. Each of those countries, they have their own reasons for joining forces with North Korea.
So break it down for us. What's in it for each of them?
Well, for China, it's partly about challenging U.S. dominance in the region. They see North Korea as a useful tool to disrupt things, to keep the U.S. off balance.
Okay, so China's playing the long game, as usual. What about Pakistan? Why are they in bed with North Korea?
Well, they have a long-standing rivalry with India, right? And North Korea provides them with access to technology, to expertise that they wouldn't otherwise have. It's a way for them to punch above their weight, so to speak.
And Turkey? What's their angle? They're a NATO member, for crying out loud. Why would they risk alienating the West by siding with a rogue state like North Korea.
Turkey's an interesting case. Singh portrays them as increasingly ambitious, wanting to reclaim their historical role as a major power in the Middle East and beyond.
So they're thinking big.
Huge. And they see an alliance with North Korea as a path to get there. It gives them access to nuclear weapons technology, which would dramatically increase their influence. It's a way for them to say, hey, we're not just a regional player anymore. We're a force to be reckoned with.
But it's a risky move, right? I mean, aligning with North Korea with this Islamic communism axis, they're essentially turning their back on the West, on NATO.
It's a gamble, for sure. But Singh argues that it's a gamble they're willing to take. They believe the world is changing, that the old rules no longer apply, and they're betting on a future where they come out on top, even if it means breaking with their traditional allies.
It's a wild scenario. I mean, who could have predicted this strange alliance forming?
That's what makes the book so compelling, right? It forces us to think outside the box, to imagine possibilities that we might not otherwise consider.
And it sets the stage for some seriously high-stakes drama, right? I mean, you've got these secret alliances, these hidden agendas, and the U.S. suddenly realizing they've been played.
Oh, yeah. Things are about to get a lot more complicated.
And dangerous. Stay tuned, because in part 2, we'll see just how quickly things escalate from this tense standoff to all-out war. So the U.S. is staring down this web of deceit, right? They've got this new Islamic communism alliance, and it's a clear violation of the NKND. They're seeing a direct threat to their interests and to their allies in the region.
Yeah.
What are their options here? I mean, what can they even do at this point? How does Singh lay out the U.S. response?
Well, they're in a tough spot, that's for sure. It's a classic damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
Right, like all the options are bad.
Exactly. At first, they try the usual stuff, sanctions, diplomatic pressure, trying to pull some of the allies away from that bloc.
Like maybe try to get Pakistan back on their side.
Yeah, something like that, but none of it really works. China's already all in on propping up North Korea, and the other partners are too focused on their own goals. So the U.S. is basically left with this awful choice. Either accept a nuclear-armed North Korea with these emboldened allies, or
go to war.
Yeah, take military action knowing it could easily spiral into a much bigger conflict.
And Singh suggests they go for the military option. They launch preemptive strikes on North Korean facilities.
It's presented as a calculated risk, yeah. The thinking is if they hit North Korea's nuclear program hard enough, they might be able to cripple it, stop them from developing even more dangerous weapons, and maybe, just maybe, it'll scare the other countries into backing down.
It's a big gamble, though, right?
A huge gamble, because there's always that risk that it backfires spectacularly.
And, well, that's kind of what happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How does Singh describe this escalation, this chain reaction that leads to war?
Oh, it's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another, and suddenly you've got a full-blown conflict on your hands. So the U.S. launches these strikes, right? And, of course, China and North Korea, they retaliate immediately.
So they hit back.
Hard. North Korea starts firing missiles at Japan, pulling them into the fight. And then the South China Sea, that becomes a major battleground. You've got the U.S. and its allies, the Quad, India, Australia, Japan going up against Chinese naval forces. It's a tense, chaotic situation, and things are escalating rapidly.
So you've got this regional conflict brewing, a powder keg in East Asia. But how does it explode into a world war? What's the tipping point that draws in the other major players, like Russia?
Well, it all comes down to, you guessed it, those unforeseen consequences. Remember Turkey with their big ambitions? They're feeling pretty confident at this point. They've got these new powerful friends, and maybe they're thinking the U.S. is weakened, distracted by the fighting in Asia, so they decide to make their move.
What do they do?
Singh describes this surprise attack, a Turkish offensive pushing into the Caucasus, threatening Russia's southern borders.
Wow, so they're going after Russia. That's a bold move.
Incredibly bold, and it totally changes the whole game. Suddenly, Russia, who had been kind of playing it cool, not fully committing to either side, they're now directly threatened.
So they're forced to pick a side.
Pretty much. And it's not just Turkey they have to worry about. Singh suggests that China sees this as an opportunity to put pressure on Russia's eastern borders, too. So now Russia's facing a potential two-front war with their core territories under threat.
So they join the U.S.-led coalition.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a strange bedfellow situation.
It is, right? It's like a mirror image of the alliances we saw in World War II. The old enemies become allies, at least for now, because they have a common enemy. And it shows how fluid these international relationships can be, how quickly things can shift when the stakes are high enough. In a global conflict like this, survival often trumps ideology.
That makes sense. But even with Russia on their side, the book doesn't exactly paint a rosy picture of the war, does it?
Not at all. Singh is very clear about the costs of this conflict. Millions of people die, economies are shattered, global trade networks collapse. It's a sobering reminder of just how destructive war can be, even in the 21st century.
It's heavy stuff. And to think, it all started with that broken North Korean nuclear deal. It's amazing how one event can set off such a catastrophic chain reaction.
It's a reminder that we live in a complex, interconnected world where seemingly isolated events can have global consequences.
So we've got this devastating war raging. But the story doesn't end there, does it? This is just the prelude to an even bigger shift to this whole new world order. Let's dive into that after a quick break.
All right, so we've got this unlikely alliance, the US and Russia, fighting side by side. And they actually pull it off. They managed to defeat this, what did Singh call it, this Islamic communism axis.
It's a hard-won victory, though. I mean, the book really drives home the cost of this war. Yeah, millions dead, economies in ruins, the whole world's been turned upside down. But it doesn't end there, does it? Out of all this destruction, something new emerges. Singh calls it a new world order. I say, when I first read about this part, it almost sounded, I don't know, like too far out there. You know, like something out of a sci-fi novel.
It's definitely a radical departure from anything we've ever seen before, but that's what makes it so interesting to think about. Singh's not just talking about redrawing some borders on a map or shifting alliances. He's reimagining the whole system, the very foundations of global governance and power.
So, okay, paint us a picture. What does this new world actually look like? He mentions dividing the world into 10 zones, right? What's that all about?
So picture this. The world is divided up into these massive geopolitical blocks. You've got North America, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and so on. Each zone has a certain degree of autonomy. They can manage their own internal affairs to some extent, but
they all answer to a higher power.
Exactly. There's this new global governing body that sits above everything else. It's kind of like a super UN, but with real teeth. It's designed to make decisions more efficiently, to prevent future conflicts by basically forcing countries to work together.
Okay, I'm following you. But who controls this global body? Who gets to call the shots?
Well, that's where the victors of the war come in. The US, Russia, India, Japan, they're the ones who get to set the rules for this new world. They basically become the new global power brokers.
So it's kind of like, I don't know, like a benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah.
A council of the powerful deciding the fate of the world.
It's definitely got that vibe, yeah. And Singh acknowledges that there's huge potential for abuse in this kind of system. The powerful could easily exploit the weaker countries, impose their will on everyone else.
And what about the losers of the war? What happens to China, Turkey, Pakistan?
They don't fare so well, that's for sure. They're forced to give up territory, disarm, basically submit to the authority of this new world order. They lose a lot of their sovereignty, their power on the world stage.
It's a pretty stark reminder that in this scenario, at least, there are clear winners and losers. But it's not just about power and control, right? Singh also suggests that this new global entity, this super UN, it's also about tackling some of humanity's biggest challenges, like climate change, resource scarcity, the rise of AI.
Right, that's the interesting part. He envisions this new world order not just as a way to keep the peace, but also as a platform to address these existential threats that require global cooperation. Like, no single country can solve these problems on their own.
So you've got this tension, right, between a system designed to consolidate power in the hands of a few and this desire to use that power for good, for the benefit of all humankind. It's a pretty tricky balancing act.
Absolutely, and it raises some really tough questions about, how much power is too much power? What are the limits of global governance? Where do individual rights fit into all of this? These are questions we need to be thinking about now as we face these global challenges in the real world.
It's a lot to process. I mean, some of this stuff sounds pretty intense, maybe even a little scary. But I think you're right. It's important to have these conversations.
Absolutely. Even if we don't agree with everything Singh proposes, even if some of it seems far-fetched, the book pushes us to think critically about the world we're creating, the choices we're making.
Yeah, like what kind of future do we want? And how do we get there?
It's not about predicting the future. It's about understanding the possibilities, both good and bad.
Well said. And I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the next great war. It's definitely given us a lot to think about. And to our listeners, we encourage you to check out the book for yourselves. Do your own deep dive into these complex issues.
And keep those conversations going. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues, because the future is, well, it's what we make it.
That's right. Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.